Well, Tony was talking there about the French economy, and the Paris Olympics has given a much-needed boost to several sectors of the French economy. And that's according to the tourism minister, Olivier Grégoire. The number of people staying at hotels in cities that hosted Olympic events rose 16% on the previous year. Grégoire also said the number of people visiting museums, restaurants and bars in the French capital had risen 25%. Meanwhile, the Bank of France said third-quarter economic activity was on course to rise by at least 0.35% due to Paris hosting the Games. Well, Alexander Budzier is from the Saïd Business School at the University of Oxford. And thanks ever so much for coming on Global Business Europe. Now, look, hosting the Olympic Games, it's big business. Has Paris 2024 been a money spinner for the French economy?
Well, you just heard that it resulted in a small bump in tourism and economic output so far, if those numbers are indeed true. At the other hand, Paris has spent on the events of the last 16 days somewhere around 8 billion euros. And if you take into account all the other investments they made, for instance, into the metro, then they reported a figure of 33 billion that was spent for other games-related investments. So that is a very large amount of money to be spent on, well, if these numbers are true, a small bump in tourism.
Yeah. You know, Athens and Rio, when they hosted the Games, they both overspent, and those economies weren't really in very good shape by the time their Games came around. Their legacy afterwards also pretty bleak. France is in better shape, isn't it?
Well, you already heard us in the previous packages that there is a lot of trouble in France brewing, and there's at the moment the debate about cancelling programs, as we just heard from your correspondent. And that's a very strange or very similar phenomena to what happened before, that hosts are bidding for the Olympics when the economy is pretty well off. And 8 years later, when the games are actually happening, often the opposite is true. The economy is quite weak. But in order to get any benefits out of the big investment into the Olympics, the next few years will be really, really important. So one thing that we've seen in Rio was, because of their economic crisis after the Games, they cancelled a lot of the programs that try to extract the benefits from the Olympic investment. So it's kind of the worst thing France can do now would be to cancel all those programs that really generate Paris as a city, make use of all the venues they have now built and all the new transport infrastructure to actually make this 8 billion spent worthwhile.
So that's the worst thing they could do. Well, what would be the best thing that they could do then, in terms of all of those non-Olympics related tourism related businesses and the longer term implications there?
Indeed. And we've seen this when it worked really well. So, for instance, in Barcelona, but also London 2012, is that needs long-term funding and long-term funding commitments that are also taken away from political whims and political decision-making. And then the Olympics can have a real positive benefit, for instance, on urban regeneration and increasing the sustainability of the host cities. And that's where the real, true, long-term benefits will come from. But that requires long-term funding commitments, not as large as the Olympics itself, of course, but long-term funding commitments and ring-fencing those kind of funding commitments from whatever political waves and changes are going on.
Alexander Budzier from the Saïd Business School at the University of Oxford, thank you very much.
Thanks for having me.